We are part of the Fired Up Sports Network of shows. Please check out other Fired Up Sports Network podcasts like the TheP-LotPod, Water Cooler Talk, Bell Smashers, Philly Sports Love and Pain, Drunk on Broad, Beer Battered Sports, and the Fired Up Sports Show, which are available on all major podcasting hosting sites and social media. Also, check out Mark Ramos' Roundup on firedupsports.com, which breaks down the happenings going on with all your favorite local teams.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the TheP-LotPodcast. John here, joined once again by Michael. Michael, how you doing, man?
Good, man. Good. Doing good.
So it is rainy in the Delaware Valley today. It's looks like it's gonna be rainy all weekend, which really
It was a nice,
because
it was a nice week of weather.
We have. I know I've been hearing it all week. Like people are like, oh, I'm so ready for fall. I'm ready for the leaves change. I'm ready for the leaves to change colors. I'm ready for them to fall down. You know, I'm ready for pumpkin spice lattes and fucking pumpkin pie and stuff and like whatever. Dude, I kind of like miss just like this kind of summerish weather where it's not like insanely hot or humid and you can just go outside and like go for a walk.
This week has been nice in terms of the weather. Finally, hasn't been like just egregiously hot, while also not being like a total downpour. Like this week was pretty perfect summer weather, of like peaking at the mid to high 80s, but it's really mostly in the upper 70s, low 80s, and that's just like it's been a nice day. But obviously, this weekend is going to be pretty wet. It appears.
We're approaching the time of year where we're right before like training camp for hockey and basketball.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, we saw a little bit of nice preview of basketball with Olympic hoops. Shout out to Joel Embiid. But we're kind of approaching the season where it's like you're setting up for fall.
Yeah.
And one of the staples of fall, and it's a topic we don't really have ever talked about in the 4 years of this show. Like, Michael, next month is going to be the 4 years we've been doing this podcast.
Yeah, that's insane. 4 years. It's a long time. Time really does fly. I mean, listen, I remember starting this show in my dorm room freshman year, my freshman dorm, where it looked like you would call it like the prison, because I had the cinder block walls.
Yeah, it looked like you
behind
were
me.
in like a jail cell.
Yeah, it looked like I was in, some solitary confinement or something.
Well, I went to Catholic school. We had the cinder block walls, and
Yeah, it's same sort of vibe. And then as the rooms changed, so much so that my Wi-Fi started being terrible my senior year, and I had to start doing it from the library. How about that? But yeah, a lot of different places that the podcast has been done. But we'll be here in this spot for a little while.
So the one topic we've never really gone in depth on ever.
Mm-hmm.
It's been fantasy football.
Yeah, we've touched on it from time to time. It's not like we don't do it. We both do it. I think you took a year off from it at some point over the last few years. But the first year I ever did fantasy football was the Devontae Freeman breakout year. The first year Devontae Freeman went crazy for the Falcons. And I won that league, and I haven't won since. I've come close a few times, couple second place finishes, but I've been unable to get the win, especially once money started getting involved, league buy-ins and whatnot. So it's been, I feel like I've been snake bitten a few times. My first round draft picks, I had the first overall pick the year after Jonathan Taylor went crazy. So I drafted Jonathan Taylor, and that was a nightmare. And then I got a late first round draft pick that I panic picked Alvin Kamara, and he was terrible. And last year I had the 3rd overall pick, and I took Jamar Chase and expecting some crazy things, and obviously with Burrow being hurt and Chase himself being hurt, it just was a nightmare to own him. I had Jalen Waddle last year, it was a nightmare to own him, inconsistent all year. Like, it was just it was not a fun year, fantasy-wise for me, and back
Yeah,
again to it. Hopefully, get some better
last year
turn
for
this year.
me, I was second in the league in points, but I missed the playoffs.
Yeah, I mean, that's just how it goes
And I
sometimes.
missed the playoffs because, as I mentioned, I was like second in points, but the last 4 weeks of the season, all of my opponents had their highest scoring week of the season against me.
Yeah, I mean, I know,
And then the
yeah.
final week of the season, I was playing my buddy Zach, friend of the show, who has been on the show a few times.
Mhm,
He, I was winning, and I thought I had to win. Him and I had to play each other to make the playoffs. Whoever won that game made the fantasy playoffs.
mhm.
And I have Travis Kelce on my team. And if you recall, in that Chiefs loss, I forget who they played.
Was it on Christmas?
I think it might have been on
It was
Christmas.
the Raider game, right?
No, it was when Kadarius Toney lined up offsides and they
Right.
negated that
Yes, yes, yes.
Kelsey
Was that
catch.
Christmas? The lateral, the
Right.
catch and lateral.
Well, well, if that would have held up, I would have beaten him because the following day it was Monday Night Football, Giants Packers, and he had Jordan Love. And what would have happened was, remember the Giants had a game-winning field goal with Tommy DeVito leading
Mhm.
them down the field. Well, if the Giants would have just gone 3-and-out, and then Love would have then had to do the kneel downs, that would have negated points, and I would have won. But because Tommy DeVito,
I mean, just some of the worst unfortunate fantasy luck. I've seen leagues, I have friends in leagues that take into account how annoying it can be to lose because the team you're going up against, puts up a crazy week and it negates how good your week was, where there's an opportunity to get 2 wins every week. There is your head-to-head matchup that you get a win or a loss, and then if you're in the top half of scores, so if you have a 12-team league, if you're in the top 6, you get a win. You get like an extra win because you scored in the top half. So if you had the 3rd most points in a week and you just happen to be going up against the guy that scored the 2nd most points and you lose, you're still gonna get something because you were in the top half. And I
oh,
thought
that's interesting.
it's interesting. It's something you gotta get everybody on board for. Some
It
people
forces people to
obviously.
keep playing.
Yeah, and it's just like there's always something where you're head to head where that's where you really can get screwed. It gives you a nice little safety net in that regard. But anyways, the way we're going to talk about some fantasy today is we're going to go through, the main positions: quarterback, running back, wide receiver, and tight end. We're going to give a player that we like and a player we don't like, each of us. And then we're going to go into some general strategies and maybe some other little discourse about it. But John, how do you want to start us off?
So I think we should kind of just talk about, before we start talking about players, I think we need to just talk about general strategies. Like everybody, if you're like serious about really anything, like you should
You gotta have
really
some sort of plan,
you should have some sort of plan going into your draft.
Yeah.
Like if you go into a draft with like no strategies, then you're gonna get cooked because that's when you see people just make really stupid picks,
Hmm.
like
Yeah.
taking a kicker like in the 7th round, for example, because you filled out you've taken one player from each position
Yeah.
already.
Yeah.
Like I mean like hey, once I find out my draft position, or like what we're gonna do at the day of the draft in our league is you're gonna find out where you're picking that day, so
That's
no
what
one
that's what
has.
we used to do. Today, this year around, we gave it a little earlier, but yeah, we did used to do like an hour before the draft. We would have it get decided, and then go from there. Give yourself a little
And
less of a plan.
yeah, and I mean, I've done a fantasy draft where we actually had the board.
I haven't done one of those yet. It always seems like a good time, but the it's a tough like it's always tough to try to get everybody in person when you get 12 people to get everyone to agree on a night. You barely get enough people that can agree on a good draft time that works for everyone, let alone to actually be able to go somewhere and do a board. But
Yeah, so I would say like if you have like I think almost all these NFL these like fantasy football sites have mock drafts you can do. I would recommend always just doing some mock drafts, maybe just sitting down, maybe spending like 30 minutes to an hour.
I mean, mock drafts go really quick, especially if the other picks are like auto. Like it's really like you're just kind of picking.
Especially if you're in a league with your friends and you're gonna like be trash talking the whole time. Like you just want to win. Like I don't like
Yeah,
I like I'm sorry, but it's like you
it's
know,
true. It's this competitive nature. There's usually money involved.
or the new thing now is to have a punishment for finishes in last place. So you really don't want to be in that position.
Yeah, you don't want to finish last for sure. So yeah, I guess to start off with some strategies. My biggest strategy, kind of over the years as time has gone on, is I definitely favor wide receivers more than running backs. And sometimes, listen, I'm going to give strategies. I haven't won anything in a while, but the way I've just seen most teams succeed, or at least the best, I feel like the best floor for your, situation is to take receivers earlier because when you look at wide receivers in fantasy, you look at wide receivers in the NFL, like this also applies in that regard. How many times have we been talking about with the Cowboys and CD Lamb contract gaffes and their other players that, oh, it's a lot easier to find an elite wide receiver than it is to find at other positions. And, you look at the NFL, you can probably name about 20 wide receivers that are very, very good and should be good fantasy producers. And then 20, I mean, you know, that's 2 per team in a 10 team. It's about, 2 per team in a 12. And if you go to the inverse of that with a position of value like running backs, there's simply a lot less, good running backs. So unless you can get your hands on one of the better ones, which still is a crapshoot, as we know, a lot of highly drafted running backs, things just happen all the time, whether that be injuries, whether that be, you know, they run into run into the wall, the rookie wall about something, or fall off the cliff. It's just there's so much volatility with the running back position in fantasy that I feel like drafting wide receivers early, especially in most PPR formats, passing league, all that sort of stuff. I think there's just it gives you a higher floor and less room for disappointment than drafting, running backs early. We're past the days where the first rounds in fantasy football drafts, if there were 10 teams, it used to look like 7 running backs before you'd even get a receiver off the board, or maybe there'd be 1 receiver in the top 5, but the next 8 picks are all gonna be running backs because that's just how things used to be. Now, you look in the first rounds, you're getting majority receivers for sure.
I agree with that. I think especially with the flex, if you're like a 2 wide receiver in a flex, you're gonna flex a wide receiver
More often
like
than not,
like
for sure.
90% of the time. Like you're not gonna flex a tight end, you're not gonna flex a running back.
If you're flexing a running back, you're definitely in some sort of surplus with the running back position.
Yeah, definitely with a surplus, but also too to add to your point, there's way more good receivers available versus running backs, and it's
Mhm.
we talked about this before I hit record. The I do think there is some credence with the zero running back strategy,
Mhm.
but the problem with that is you need to pick up guys from the waiver wire, and if you're
Like,
someone,
often.
yeah, and it's like to me, if you're in a league where there's a waiver order, then you can't really depend on that because you're going to have somebody that's like has a really good team and they haven't used their waiver in like a couple weeks. And
Mhm.
then like you're saving saving it for someone, right?
Yeah, exactly, and, like, it's you know, it's difficult to be able to, you know, get that juicy first few weeks waiver wire pickup that everyone and their, mother's trying to pick up after they're like, "Oh, this is the guy that's gonna have the crazy season," and you're trying to get your hands on him, and, the other side of that 0 running back strategy, not that it means you draft 0 running backs, but it's like 0 for the bulk of the draft, is that theoretically, if you're drafting all these really good receivers, there should be a team that maybe doesn't have good receivers and has good running backs, and that's when people like to make trades right after the draft. You know, be able to get your elite receivers, trade some of your lower tier ones to get one of those better running backs. So that's all. That's all a part of it.
Yeah, like, I don't know, man. Like Gus, like if for some random reason Gus Edwards is playing well, which
Hmm.
I,
He could. I
I
don't think
don't
it's
think
a
I'm,
bad.
dude. I didn't know this. He's 29 years old.
It feels like all running backs are right around. Like it feels like Gus Edwards has been around for a while, but I guess he has.
Has he just been spent? He spent his entire career with Baltimore. Last year was the
Really?
most carries he's ever received.
I mean, like there's handfuls of running backs that thrive in that limited opportunity thing, as we saw last year. Perfect example for this was Alexander Madison, where when he was the running back two, you know, he was the perfect handcuff that when Dalvin Cook got injured and he got in there, he always seemed to have big weeks in his absence, and it was like, "Oh, Dalvin Cook's gone, Alexander Madison's the number 1, like, he's gonna explode, we've seen how good he's been," and Madison was one of the biggest fantasy busts in all of the sport last year. He was terrible. He had how many goal to go carries, and he had, like, -5 yards and no touchdowns, like, something ridiculous like that, so,
Oh yeah,
you
he
know
was like the most probably like the worst red zone running back in like football history. It felt
Yeah,
like
yeah, but
like, and then he's on the Raiders, but
Zamir White, being there, that's just a younger, explosive guy.
did you
It'll be
see?
interesting
Did
to
you
see.
see Zamir White like on? He took a picture of himself,
No.
and he looked like he's ridiculously jacked. Like he looks like he weighs like 200. Yeah, he's listed as 6 foot 215. He looks like 6 foot 235 of like jack muscle guy.
There you go.
So I feel like he could be a deep sleeper because the Raiders' offense is so draconian. Well, we'll talk about our sleepers later, but one of my strategies too, and you just mentioned it, like running backs over receivers. It kind of goes along the same lines with wide receivers. I always draft number one receivers.
Like,
And
on their team, on their
on
respective
their team, the
teams.
definitive number one receiver on their team. For example, last year, I made sure to everyone I drafted was the guy. There was no one that's going to push the other guy away. The guy was the most targeted player,
Mhm.
right? For example, I had Christian Kirk. I took him like in the 7th or 8th round, right? Now, like Christian Kirk, you're like, that's not as sexy as someone like Jalen Waddle, right?
Mhm.
Christian Kirk was way more consistent than Jalen Waddle, and you probably got
Yeah.
Jalen Waddle like in the 3rd or 4th round, right?
I know, for sure. It's like it's totally it's definitely a fair and, a team that comes up with that sort of vibe is like the Chicago Bears with 3 receivers that have high fantasy intrigue and DJ Moore, Keenan Allen coming off the season he had last year, and then obviously the rookie Rome Odunze. You know, I it's I find it hard to believe that all 3 guys are gonna have, say, you know, 850 plus receiving yard seasons. I don't think it's gonna be necessarily like the Eagles where Brown and Devonta Smith are both gonna have over 1,000 yards, where I think it's more likely that one Bears receiver has 1,000, one guy's close, and the other guy, you know, probably has in like the 700s. And it's risky. It's an interesting predicament to kind of put yourself in. But I think it's a solid strategy that if you're drafting a guy, like there's more value in the guy that's going to get more of the targets than someone that is probably the better player, but in fantasy world, might not see the same share of targets and has more of a boom bust potential, which is exactly what Jalen Waddle was last year, whereas Christian Kirk was kind of just consistently getting good targets each week and catches each week.
Yeah, like if you're gonna like, obviously the person is gonna draft Jalen Waddle. If Tyreek Hill suffered like a torn ACL,
Mhm.
then obviously Jalen Waddle was gonna be like a top 5 receiver in fantasy because of that. But you can't go into your draft thinking, oh well, if Tyreek Hill gets hurt for like a month and Jalen Waddle's gonna be like, you can't think like that, you know?
Yeah, no, you can't. It's such a yeah. It's such a way that it almost feels like it'll never pay off in your favor.
What's the strategy that you have?
I mean, besides like favoring receivers, I I find like this is a strategy. We're not going to talk about this position kind of at all after this, really. But when looking at drafting defenses, for example, not that I think this is some newfound cutting edge strategy when drafting defenses, because there's a handful, it's a small handful of defenses that you can draft and just kind of leave in your lineup all year, pretty much regardless of their opponent. No team is like scaring them away. There's few elite defenses out there where it's like, I know they're going to get sacks. I know they're going to force turnovers. A defense like that was the Jets last year. They were one of the better defenses in the NFL. Translated to fantasy, they shut down a bunch of elite quarterbacks, all that sort of stuff. But if you're not going to have an opportunity to get like those, three defenses that are going to be consistently high scoring each week, I think it's very much worth to kind of do your due diligence on schedule watching, looking at each team's schedule. What team has an easy? You got to find the
Oh, that's a
perfect
really good. That's
balance.
a good strategy. Can I
Finding the
give?
perfect balance of an easy schedule, as in like weak offensive opponents and a defense that like doesn't totally blow. Like you take a team out of like the AFC West where it's mostly crap outside of the Chiefs. Yeah, a team like, I don't know, the Chargers are going to have an easy schedule because they play, you know, 4 games against the Broncos and the Raiders and, a game against the Chiefs, and the Chiefs offense been struggling, and they're gonna play a 4th place schedule and all that sort of stuff. But the Chargers defense isn't really that good, so, like, there's that, that give and take that you gotta find, a team maybe in the NFC South that has an intriguing upside defense and a weak offensive division could be more something to look at. Like, that's the sort of decisions that I make if when I'm back end of the draft and it's like, okay, I didn't get a chance to get the Jets defense or whatever. Now I need to be creative, or it's like, let me draft the defense that I can. I'm looking at their first half. They have weeks 1 through 6 are against bad offenses, bad quarterbacks. I'll trust that defense for the first few months of the year, and then I'll pivot into something else and look for a good stretch. Like all my waiver wire defensive team pickups. I'm looking a couple weeks in advance of like, okay, I know I'm going to need a defense in like 3 weeks,
Can I
and this
what
team's
with
playing
what
the
you're
Giants.
saying, Michael? You just brought up a
Yeah,
really interesting point. Good job, dude.
thank
Um,
you.
uh, you just described a what you just said too. Oh, I'm gonna draft a defense with a really like easy schedule, or a perceived easier schedule because they missed the playoffs and they have an easy and they play in a weak division. I'm gonna give you the defense that the exact scenario that you're like describing,
Hmm.
and you tell me, dude. So the team that you just described, I think perfectly, is the New Orleans Saints. My buddy at
They're a
work.
team that gets drafted though, unfortunately. Like people draft the Saints and like set it and forget it. Like they're definitely, I think they fall into that category, which makes
So
them a
can I
little.
just give you like a pretty? I'm gonna just of like just not looking at the schedule, just thinking, oh, they play an easy schedule and they're just gonna like they're gonna perform well because they were ranked in the top 10 last year, and
Mhm.
they have names on their defense like Lattimore, you
Yeah.
know, Jordan, etc. Like they can
Mhm.
put up fantasy points.
Mhm.
They just every year it seems they consistently have a good defense, right?
Mhm.
Would you like to hear the first like 6 weeks of their schedule and to show you why they're going to get dropped within like the first 6 weeks of the season?
Mhm.
Okay, week 1 at home, Carolina Panthers. Okay,
That's fine.
that's okay,
People will take
right?
that matchup every time.
That's okay. Like Bryce Young can have a decent game and he still can't score points, right?
Yeah.
That's fine. Week 2 at Dallas Cowboys. Dallas Cowboys were a top 5 offense last
Yeah,
year.
that's not that. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Week 3 at home against the Eagles.
Eee. Hopefully
Week
that's not a
4.
good week.
Week 4 at Atlanta.
Division matchup at Atlanta. They're gonna want to flex their offensive muscles.
Kirk's got 3 weeks under his belt to get back
Yeah.
in the game shape, right?
Yeah.
For Coach Haynes. Week 5 at Kansas City.
That's always it's never like even though their offense struggled last year and ended up being a favorable offense to start your defense against, it's never you're never feeling good about your defense against Patrick Mahomes.
But here's the thing, though. I feel like at this now, to what you just kind of brought up, though, whoever's going to have the Saints defense is going to be like, oh my God, they blow. I'm going to drop them because I need somebody,
It's
right?
if you're gonna draft the Saints defense, you need to be active kind of each week on picking up other defenses and just kinda sitting on the Saints defense
Or
because I'm sure
carry
that
two
schedule
defenses.
yeah, and I'm sure that
Because
schedule
guess what,
softens
Michael?
up.
This is the rest of their schedule.
Mhm.
Home against Tampa, home against Denver,
That's go.
road
Yeah.
Chargers,
Yep.
road Panthers, home
Yep.
Falcons, home
Okay.
Browns, home
Okay.
Rams, at
Okay.
Giants, home
Ooh.
Commanders,
Ooh.
at at Green Bay,
That's
home
tough.
Raiders, at Buccaneers.
Yeah, I mean, it's a complete utter fall off in terms of the offensive quality that they
Which
face.
means
You go
whoever's going
from
to pick the Saints is going to panic drop them probably by like week 5 because they're going to be like, oh my God, they blow.
yeah, snatch 'em up.
And then snatch them up right away.
Yeah.
Like that's the thing, right?
Yeah.
So I think my last strategy, and I think this is going to be really good for who we like and who we don't like at each position,
Mhm.
is do not draft a quarterback or a tight end in rounds 1 through 5.
The tight end one's always so tough, especially because the tight end in fantasy world, it used to be like a definitive 3 to 4-headed monster, where it was like if you had the big 3, you were set. But if you weren't gonna get any of those 3, then yes, you should wait. But as years have moved, it's like that big 3 doesn't exist anymore. It's not as consistent, and it's like you can take your chance on aging, old, good, skilled tight ends that are gonna be going in the top 4 rounds, like Travis Kelce, like George Kittle, like Mark Andrews. You can take your chances with those guys, but odds are you're probably not gonna get the return on investment that you kinda put into it with that draft pick. So you're better off waiting for guys and, you know, that you gotta be tight end's very, very much a crapshoot. It's a very, very difficult position to draft. It's hard to kinda nail. It's been hard to nail for quite some time.
So yeah, I just think that with tight end especially, especially this year where there's a lot of names going really high. I feel like this is like one of the deepest tight end classes we've seen
Mhm.
in a very long time.
Yeah.
Which I think this is a really good transition. I mean, unless do you have another strategy you would like to talk about?
No, I'm good. I'm ready to get into the players.
Okay, so let's do our so quarterback we like and quarterback that we don't like. Let's start with the likes. So quarterback that I really like in fantasy because he kind of just goes like in the middle rounds, like seventh, eighth round range, and kind of goes with my advice is Jordan Love. His average draft position, Michaels, is around the 70s to like the 90s.
Mm-hmm.
Because everybody that takes the quarterbacks early, like Josh Allen and Lamar and like Mahomes, like they just start panic draft. They have to then go and then take receivers and running backs. But if you're like going after receivers and running backs very early on, get yourself 3 elite wide receivers or a high upside back and like 2 elite receivers or whatever. You're like, I think Jordan Love is going to be like a top. He has the potential to be like a top 7 quarterback in fantasy this year because he's not like super mobile like a Lamar, but we've seen him like run. The Packers have a second place schedule.
Mm-hmm.
They're a lot of people are picking them to even win the NFC North.
Yeah.
Like they have the
Yeah.
Lions number, like the toughest team they're going to play, which is going to be the Lions or the Eagles. Like I really like Jordan Love. I think he's got like a lot. He's got a lot of diverse weapons. Now they have Josh Jacobs. I don't think they're gonna utilize Josh Jacobs more in the passing game. I think he's more of a viable passing guy, a passing
Mm-hmm.
running back than Aaron Jones was. Aaron
Yeah.
Jones was like
Yeah.
hurt all last year anyway.
Yeah. It was a shame when he played well, but he just didn't play a lot.
So that's my like
Quarterback.
quarterback that I really like.
Yeah. I think all right, so my quarterback that I like that's like it's not necessarily a sleeper, but I think it's a sleeper in terms of I think what could be a reliable quarterback just kind of in fantasy in general, is Geno Smith. So Geno
Really,
Smith had his breakout under Dave Canales a few years ago and was putting up big numbers and was, um, you know, looking resurgent. Everyone was like, "Oh my God, Geno Smith's back!" All that sort of stuff. Happy day. Last year had like a general down year. Was kind of dealing with some injuries all season. Bad offensive line play. Was just unfortunate circumstances. Seattle basically went through a complete overhaul of their coaching staff, and I like their offensive coaching staff, more of a, you know, pass heavier not that they weren't pass heavy to begin
yeah,
with, but it's
Washington's
just
offensive
yeah,
coordinator is another offensive
new
coordinator.
new stuff, and I think they improved their offensive line a little bit, so I think he'll be upright and he'll healthy more so through the season, and I don't know, I believe in him in the way I believed in him after he had the, breakout season where people were, he was like a fringe top 10 quarterback, and I think that another year of, you know, the good receiving core that he's consistently had, but I think a year of JSN kind of overtaking perhaps that wide receiver 2 role as a more explosive type of player than, not that Tyler Lockett doesn't make big plays or whatever, but I think Jackson Smith and Jigba will be more poised to kind of take some sort of leap, and I think that all that kind of pairs well for a good passing attack and a good passing offense. And, I like the quarterback of said good passing offense.
Yeah, my
And he's a guy
so
that's going to go very, very late in draft. So I think, if you draft him as like a backup with someone like Jordan Love or someone later in the draft as your starter, anyways, I just feel like Geno Smith can be a guy that consistently is putting up big numbers and touchdowns that maybe down the stretch run becomes your starter.
my only concern is because they have Sam Howell. Like if he has a rough game or if he gets hurt again and like Howell comes in and looks good, they might like let Sam Howell play more and like kind of
Yeah.
cut into that. But that's a really good because you're in a 12 team. Like, yeah, if you're in a 12 or 14 team league, that's a
Mhm.
really good take on your end because, like,
Mhm.
I was in a 14 team league, and if your quarterback got hurt, you didn't have a viable backup, like, you were screwed. You were
Yeah.
grade A screwed.
Yeah. Yeah, you don't wanna be, you know, scavenging the waiver wires if, you know, you get some sort of bad injury, and then you become a week to week waiver wire quarterback carousel. That's just one of the worst places to be.
Yeah, man. Like, I agree with you on that. It's I've seen it happen to people. It happened to the guy that drafted Aaron Rodgers last year in my league, and he had Desmond Ritter,
Mhm.
and he had like the most stacked team outside of Ritter. Like, Ritter would be like the only thing that whole situation held him back from winning the fantasy championship.
That sucks. That sucks.
All right, so quarterbacks that we don't like. So one guy that I'm seeing, like, and I like this guy
I
watching
think
him
we might
play,
have the same guy, just the way you're starting. I think we might have the same guy, but go ahead.
but there's a player that stole a lot of touchdowns he was going to get,
Okay,
and it
never mind maybe.
impacted his value. It was Lamar Jackson.
Okay. We don't
And
have the same guy.
and I think we both like Lamar Jackson. I think we're
For
both fans
sure.
of his game. We both said he was the MVP well before anyone said he should have been the MVP,
It's
right?
also, like, he's in theory should translate to a very, very good fantasy quarterback.
But the Baltimore Ravens, for whatever reason, don't want to bring in a big name receiver. They their best receiver is Zay Flowers.
Who's fine.
He's fine, but like, he kind of has some maturity issues. He had that meltdown in the AFC Championship game. I think he's going to be a good receiver, but he's not he's not going to. This isn't like he's not going to be like Devonte Adams or
No, I
like
think there's
Amon
probably
Ra or like those guys who, like, they have a very specified skill set that they do things better than anyone else. Like, Amon Ra probably has the best hands in professional football.
yeah, I think Zay Flowers falls,
Or
like,
I'd say he
just not
runs
that
the
high.
best routes, and
Yeah.
he's got
Yeah,
great hands.
regardless.
So he's always gets open, and he's guaranteed to catch the ball, which is why he's so good in fantasy.
Yeah.
Say Flowers, it doesn't really, like, I think he's good. Like, he's like a good, really good number two receiver who's
Mhm.
masquerading as a number one because on their team they have old Odell Beckham
Mhm.
and Nelly.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's
Mark
not a pretty
Andrews
receiving.
Mark Andrews was just in a car accident. I have no clue what the hell his
Yeah.
health status is. I don't, from what I've read, it's not like serious, but he's always hurt.
He had a
And
really very banged up year
I think
last year.
and I like Isaiah Likely. Like, if Mark Andrews gets another like severe injury and you desperately need a tight end, he wouldn't be a bad guy to invest in.
I like Isaiah. We'll get into, yeah.
I like Isaiah Likely. But like, they jettisoned Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins, and they brought in future NFL Hall of Famer Derrick Henry. Michael, when they get near the goal line, are they going to get Lamar run it in, or are they just going to hand the ball to Derrick Henry?
Yeah, and it's not like Lamar's ever really been a goal line runner either, and especially where we had this discourse last year. I saw TikToks about it. I sent you TikToks about it, where Lamar Jackson's, like, sprint speed had gone down, like, average sprint speed this year had gone down from years past, not because he got slower or anything, but because the way he was running was safer and more strategic, the way he was using his legs instead of just as a pure just runner. Where younger Lamar Jackson, even the one that won MVP, but the first one, he would start running, he'd get downhill. It's like a receiver or running back in the open field, and he's just outrunning everybody. But this past year, he ran a lot more the way that, like, Patrick Mahomes runs, where, they make the joke that Mahomes runs like he's holding 2 cups of beer that he doesn't want to spill. So he's like a little upright and awkward and not really full board downhill. You watched Lamar run last year. He was using his legs in the pocket, and then if he'd start to run, he was making quick cuts to be able to, get out of bounds or get down before getting hit, taking what the defense is giving you and then getting down instead of trying to shake a defender and break a tackle and go for a big run. So even his running ability that is so special, it limits in terms of fantasy output because it's a better strategy for just winning football.
Yeah,
So
and
yeah,
honestly, if like the Ravens between now and like the start of the season, I don't know, like trade for Devontae Adams, then I'd be like, okay,
it's a different. It's a
I would
yeah,
redact my take. But
yeah.
as
But
it stands right now, like it
it's not
it,
the prettiest set of
it
weapons.
burned me last year, dude. Like here's a classic example. Like when they played the Steelers, they
Hmm.
dropped like 7 passes.
Yeah, yeah,
They dropped 7 passes, bro.
yeah,
And like one of them was a horrible drop. Ball shoots up in the air, and it was like a pick six.
yeah, yeah.
Like,
It was some sham stuff. It
yeah,
just it
it's
just it's a
shambolic.
Lamar's been a risky own the last few years, despite being still a really, really good quarterback. So my quarterback that I have my reserves about, just because I think that there could be a little bit of growing pains and there's just, I think, a lot of pressure. Not that I think this guy's going to be bad or whatever, but I think he's probably getting drafted too high, is CJ Stroud. Now, I think Stroud is very,
Ooh.
very good, and I think he's one of the better quarterbacks in football. But I think that he's getting drafted, just seeing an ADP and where he's getting picked, he's getting drafted around when those first run of quarterbacks get taken. He's getting drafted when, you know, you look at fantasy quarterbacks, the ones that have the most value are the quarterbacks that can run. He's getting drafted with, after Josh Allen and Jalen Hurts, and I know we talked about it, but like guys like Lamar Jackson, where those guys, I think are worthy of that dual threat title and deserve that sort of credit. Where I think in that next layer of quarterbacks, that next run of quarterbacks that includes like Dak Prescott and Jordan Love and, you know, those sort of quarterbacks that are more pocket passers, less running threats, I think that's more where CJ Stroud belongs to be getting drafted. Not that he's a bad quarterback, not that he'll even have a bad fantasy season, but I think he gets drafted with some assumption that he's gonna really be a runner or something. I think he should be getting drafted when guys like Burrow get drafted, not when guys like Josh Allen get drafted. And I think he's getting drafted a little too high. So maybe it's not a
I feel
strong
like you have
dislike, but
another
it's an
take
overdraft.
about Stroud. I feel like you have another Stroud take besides that too. But you may be a little too afraid
Well,
to.
like I like CJ Stroud, and I think he's gonna be very, very good. Is it possible that he has not a down year, I want to say, but just he was incredible his rookie year. And I just think it's difficult sometimes in the NFL to be elite out of your rookie year and kind of never look back. The closest thing we got to that was like Justin Herbert. And, Herbert obviously had the down year, I guess you could say, last year, dealing with all the injuries and all the other crap that was floating around that awful team. But there's not many guys that have an elite rookie season and then just kind of are always very, very good. And I think while the Texans' hype is pretty warranted, I do think they're a good team, they're a very good roster. I like their coaching. I like almost everything about them. I think that there is just maybe a chance for some natural regression, and if it's gonna come, I think it would come from the quarterback position before anything. Obviously, just because it's so hard to play quarterback, he's such a young guy, all that sort of stuff.
Well, he had 5 interceptions last year.
Right, like, is he only gonna throw 5 again this year? Like,
Uh, Probably not. Maybe more like
probably
12,
not.
13.
Right, and that's not to say that that's bad, like, it's not like, oh, he blows for that, but it's just what happens.
Well, the big thing with the Texans is they have 4. actually 5 other guys besides Stroud who are gonna be highly targeted in fantasy. Joe Mixon, Dalton Schultz,
Mm-hmm.
Diggs, Nico Collins, and Tank Dell.
Mm-hmm.
Right? They have a lot of weapons, and like you kind of brought up with Geno Smith, like there's so much talent, like how like, he has to produce,
Mm-hmm.
right? He has to
Yeah.
produce, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, but to your point, if you're like in the 5th round and you're like, oh my god, look at all these ass names, or like Stroud's better than all these guys, I'm going to take Stroud. Where like I kind of brought up like Jordan Love, or like or if you really want to even just like load up on running backs and wide receivers, like you kind of mentioned with your strategy, you're kind of going to deviate a little too much if you're just going to kind of take Stroud and then you're going
Yeah.
to screw yourself later on in the draft.
Yeah. Exactly.
Okay. Running backs. Running back that I really like. Now, this guy's always been a fantasy enigma because you kind of don't know what you're going to get, but I'm really confident on this. This guy's going like in the 5th round, and if you're going to do like the quote unquote zero running back strategy,
Mm-hmm.
or like you just want to load up on running backs and receivers on your first 4 picks, I really like Alvin Kamara. I really like Alvin Kamara because, Michael, Derek Carr blows.
Mm-hmm.
He sucks.
Yeah,
He
he's very,
cannot
very bad.
throw the ball downfield.
No.
Alvin Kamara last year, despite being suspended for like, what was it, 4 games, 5 games,
Mm-hmm.
Alvin Kamara had 73 receptions.
I mean, that's very good.
Yeah, that, like, bro, like
In the PPR world, it's really, really
if you
good.
had Alvin Kamara on your team at the end of the season, and you just either traded for him or you just waited and you were like had a really stacked team, you probably won your league,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
Why is he going in the 5th round? One, he's 29 years old.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like, don't you feel like he's like I don't know, like hasn't had a lot of wear and tear on him since like he gets suspended a couple times. He's had like Saints never really made the playoffs a whole lot during his career. Like the or beginning it did, but now they haven't. So it's not like he's Pacheco where he's had like an extra 90 to 100 carries on his body since coming into the league.
Yeah. Yeah. I like Kamara as well.
Is that the guy
I
you were
think
going to say?
no, it's not. But like I generally I actually feel decent about him this year, and that'll help roll into a different thing later. But my running back that I like this year, this I guess could also be considered a sleeper. It's not really that deep of a sleeper though. But it's Rico Dowdle, the Dallas Cowboys. I think that, they're bringing back Zeke to be their running back, and I don't know, from what we saw last year out of Elliott, he was cooked. He looked terrible. He looked putrid. I do think Zeke's gonna get goal line carries. He's gonna get touchdowns. I do believe that. But I feel as though throughout the majority of other offensive drives and other parts of the field, I think Rico Dowdle is gonna actually be heavily involved because, we saw last year that Tony Pollard kind of struggled and they didn't really address the running back position in the offseason except for Zeke. So clearly they have faith
I'm
in
actually
Rico
not
Dowdle.
surprised by that at all
Yeah.
because this is where Mike McCarthy. I don't know. Did
Mhm.
you ever like follow up the Mike McCarthy Aaron Rodgers saga at
Like,
all
what about it?
near
Like,
the end? Well, like Mike McCarthy's just a snake.
yeah, okay.
He's a snake, and he's like lazy. So he got Kellen Moore fired by telling Jerry Jones that he's not running the ball enough. Mike McCarthy was the play caller last year for the Cowboys. The Dallas Cowboys led the league in passing. Like they attempted the most passes in the
Mhm.
NFL last
Yeah.
year, right? I'm not trying to say like you're wrong. I'm not like, but my kind of concern with Rico Dowdle is like, do you remember when like Mike McCarthy at the height of his powers with the Packers, who was like their the running back they would always have was like James Starks.
Yeah, they had, like, those scat receiver backs that catch passes out of the backfield and, you know, made sort of plays. Listen, my thing is that Mike McCarthy was there for Tony Pollard to have a very, very good season. It's not like Cowboys running backs have been incompetent since he's taken over as the head coach.
I mean,
I
I'm not
just
thinking
think
it's necessarily Rico Dowdle. I just think that. I mean,
and
do you think?
also with CeeDee Lamb's whole situation being a question mark up in the air, like, we think it's gonna be resolved soon. There's numbers being thrown around out there, but I don't know, until we get the tweet that he's signing and he's showing up, he's not gonna be there. So I like the what he provides out of the receiving game as well. I think that outside of the goal line, he's just gonna be sort of a guy almost like Chase Brown, where he could almost take over as almost the lead back in the backfield outside of the goal line. I mean, there's a metric that I saw out there that was intriguing with Dowdle. So he only had 106 touches all of last year, but he was ninth at yards per created touch, which is just like it's not explosive plays, but it's how many yards are you getting absent of like the hole created by the blockers in front of you. It's basically like extra yards. Like, are you elevating a play because you didn't come in contact with your first defender until like 4 yards because it was a good, well blocked play, but then you were able to bounce it outside and create a bigger play and turn that 4-yard gain into a 12-yard gain. I think that he's just a player that I think can be explosive for what is going to be a good Cowboys offense probably again.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, that makes sense. Like he's when he touches the ball, he's
He's
explosive.
making big plays. Yeah.
He's
Yeah.
making big plays, but then at the same time, though, like Jerry Jones is such a meddler
Yeah. Yeah, I
that
mean, we'll see.
Zeke. I mean, I could see Zeke just like 25 carries, 50 yards, or something to that effect, because they just, even though Zeke ran that one drill and like collapsed on the ground because they literally has been run into the ground his entire career.
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
Right.
Running back that we don't like, Rico Dowdle. No, I'm just kidding. Uh, um, dude, the one running back that I'm like cringing, and this is a guy that I just want to flat out avoid entirely. Is I really hate to say it, it's Kyron Williams.
Wow.
It's Kyron Williams. Now,
Big
Kyron
name.
Williams last year was like the beast pickup in fantasy, right?
Mhm. He was actually drafted in my league, if you could believe that.
Someone drafted him.
Mhm. Ethan actually drafted him.
The guy that, like, the reason why I kind of cringe a little bit, and this is kind of where I feel with like the whole Rams kind of like offense right now,
Mhm.
is that this is where I kind of get worried is they used him so much last year, the Rams.
Mhm.
They they got him injured because they kept using him so much. So what do the Rams do, Michael? They spend a day 2 pick on Michigan running back Blake Corum.
Mhm.
Right. I am not a huge fan of timeshare backs. You're drafting Kyron Williams either like at the back end of the first round or in the second round
Mhm.
because he's going to get the lion's share of the touches. Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like you're just kind of like Kyron Williams to me, it's like someone who doesn't know a whole lot about like watching football versus like fantasy, where they're going to get these advanced metrics and they're going to be like, oh my god, look, Kyron Williams is like top 3 in all these metrics, and then you like watch the games and then you're just like, oh, like to me, Sean McVay has never heavily featured a running back consistently since Todd Gurley. And I think because Todd Gurley like had to basically retire at like 26 years old is a big reason why McVay likes to split carries, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then also too, like even in the passing game, you're gonna probably roll your eyes when I say this, but Cooper Kupp is healthy,
He is healthy.
and they have Puka Nacua. So, and the Rams suck. The Rams are gonna suck this year. Like, let's be realistic. The Rams are gonna blow, right?
I mean, I don't know. I wouldn't say that. I'd say as far as
Tougher schedule. Tough.
however healthy Stafford is, I think is how I wouldn't say they're gonna blow.
Stafford's banged up right now.
I know he's banged up, but if he's playing and healthy, like I think that
Well, that's another thing. Stafford gets, let's say, old Stafford gets hurt again, right?
yeah,
Stetson Bennett comes in.
yeah.
They're going to be trailing in a lot of games if that scenario happens, right? I know I just said
Mhm.
don't think about injuries, but I think with Matthew Stafford, you kind of have to like anticipate some health issues.
Yeah.
I don't know.
That's
Like
fair.
that's just kind of my take on Kyron Williams. He's a guy I'm avoiding. What about you? Who are you
So the
avoiding?
running back I'm avoiding is Devin Singletary. So Devin Singletary had a really, really nice year in Houston once like the injuries in the running back room piled up for them. He kind of took over and he was all I had him. He was on my team and he was very, very nice for me in a year that I had unreliable running backs. Devin Singletary became my most relied running back, and he was consistently like he was scoring a touchdown a week. He was getting about 100 yards a week. Like it was really, really nice. And he's their answer to replace Saquon Barkley. I feel as though his spring onto the scene was a little bit more of kind of a fluke, like breakout. Obviously he never really amounted to anything in Buffalo, and had
Well, can
the
I may,
nice
may I
yeah,
add some context to why he's going so high?
sure, go ahead.
His head coach now in New York is Brian Daboll. When he played with Brian Daboll in Buffalo, his rookie year, 12 games and 8 starts, 151 carries, 775 yards, 2 touchdowns. 2020, COVID year, 156 carries, 687 yards, 2 touchdowns. He averaged his rookie year 5.1 yards per attempt and then 4.4 yards per attempt. So that's why people think, because he knows the offense.
Yeah, whatever. Yeah, for sure. I
But,
just
but
think,
that's why he's going so high. But I'm sorry, go ahead.
yeah, you look at a Giants offense that's like mostly bad. I do think they improved the offensive line. They feel better about the signings that they made. Malik Neighbors, if he's healthy, because he seems like he's already getting banged up a ton, like that's obviously going to be, I think, the number one toy in that offense. It's going to be used kind of exuberantly. Um, But you're a running back on a bad offense that I don't think is gonna like teams feel and know what they know about Daniel Jones. Teams are gonna load the box against the Giants
You're
the
not
first time they
confident
see
in
Devin
bearded
Singletary
Daniel
run well.
Jones.
No, the first time they see Devin Singletary have a good run game, and it might happen as early as like week 1 and the Giants win or something like that, something, whatever. I think teams are really going to load the box. They're going to try to dare them to throw the ball, and it's going to be relied heavily on the Giants to get creative with their running schemes in order to get Singletary some space. So I am avoiding it. I don't think he'll be able. I also like you're reading off those numbers that you read off. I mean, those are 150 carries as a rookie. That's just you know not a ton of touches, and even last year, Devin Singletary had 216 rushes was the most of his career, 898 yards, 4 touchdowns, had, you know, only 4 touchdowns all year. I I don't know if he can handle a workload of a lead back. I don't think the breakout is gonna come in this Giants offense either. I just don't have high hopes for it in the Giants offense. So that's my running back to fade.
Yeah, I find it really odd. I'm looking at the Giants depth chart, and like their starting receivers, obviously Malik Whitneighbors is wide receiver one, then Wandale Robinson, and then their slot is Darius Slayton. I
And they
thought
still have, like, Jalen Hyatt on the
I
roster
thought
too.
Jalen Hyatt would be a starter.
I don't know. I guess we'll see.
Because you just brought up putting an 8 men in the box. Like,
Yeah.
if you have speed, you kind of can't just load up the box and just hope, you
Yeah.
know, if you don't get to the quarterback in time, I don't know. It's like I agree. That's a good guy to avoid because I feel like Devin Singletary is a guy that a lot of people are saying is a good sleeper pick, kind of for
Mhm.
what I explained. But to your point, like he'd be if it wasn't the Giants, if it was like the Bengals, it'd be
I
different.
think yeah, I think I don't, like, hate the player or whatever, but I don't know, I just don't know if we'll be able to handle, like, a full Saquon type workload and combo that with, uh, you know, I just don't trust the Giants offense much.
Okay. All right, let's do wide receiver. So a wide receiver that we love. I think this guy that I'm going to mention especially in PPR, could put up round one, early round two like numbers, and he's going late in the third, early in the fourth in the leagues that I'm in, and I think he's a guy that's going to kind of after everyone does the initial wave of wide receivers, like the top guys, he's going to
Mhm.
fall a little bit. Is Michael Pittman Jr.
Okay.
I really like Michael Pittman Jr. Michael, especially with the Colts. Uh, Wide receiver 2 to 3 issues they seem to be having with guys getting hurt
Yeah.
and just like no one else really like stepping up to being that number 2 receiver
Mhm.
as well. Michael Pittman last year, Michael, was one of the most heavily targeted receivers in the NFL. And I think he's a bigger body. And last year, 109 receptions, 1,152 yards, and 4 touchdowns.
Mhm.
His targets have jumped up every year he's played. In 2021 with Carson, he had 129 targets. In 2022, 141 targets, 141 targets, excuse me. And then last year, 156 targets, right? He might be
Mhm.
targeted. He might be like the second most targeted receiver in the NFL, like besides like CD Lamb.
Yeah, he's gonna definitely, I think, get thrown a lot to in Indy.
And we know
And
that Shane Steichen can scheme him open.
yeah, and I like Michael Pittman. I think he's a good receiver. Um, yeah, I like that pick. Um, so my guy that I I believe in, I guess, Lad McConkey, the rookie, Chargers. No Keenan Allen, no Mike Williams. Quentin Johnston is terrible. This Chargers team is not going to throw the ball a lot. I really don't think they're going to throw it a ton. However, I think when they do throw it, McConkey is going to be the guy that is pretty much getting the bulk of the targets. He has ran pretty good routes. Like they've been preaching how good his route running's been throughout camp, and I think if Herbert's healthy, all that sort of stuff, he is going to be a guy that is going to be set up off big play action plays to maybe get him down the field on long touchdowns or big third downs. You need conversions. I think they're going to kind of consistently look to McConkey to be the guy to get open in short yardage or around the goal line. Like I think there's just a lot of opportunity for him to get big catches that result in some strong points. Drafted in the second round, the lack of receivers in that organization, he's clearly going to be relied upon. I think he's going to get a pretty good share of targets his rookie year.
Yeah, that's the thing. The thing is, if Herbert, his injury is like not as. I mean, do we know if this is going to be like a season-ending injury? Like, have they, like, are they going
I don't
to?
think so, but
Like, McConkey is clear. Like, I don't know if they're going to like tank this year. Then
Mhm.
McConkey's going to. They're going to want to get the ball to their rookies and like their young players, right?
Yeah,
And then fade the older guys.
yeah.
And I think we just don't with Harbaugh. Like, is he going to be calling the plays, or are they going to have like they have an
I mean,
offensive
it's gonna be
coordinator?
his scheme.
Because the thing with the Chargers, dude, is we're like they might be the worst team in the league.
Yeah.
So the Chargers offensive coordinator, Michael,
Mhm.
is Greg Roman.
Yeah, they're gonna run the ball a ton. Like, I absolutely.
And they brought in two former Ravens running backs. So it's like, I don't
Mm,
know. But like to the point, they're gonna blow, dude. Like you can't just run the ball 50 times and like lose 35-10. I mean you could, but from a strategy perspective, it just doesn't make any sense.
mhm.
Okay. So wide receivers that we don't like. This may be this is gonna be a little controversial, but the wide receiver that actually no, I don't think it is. I don't think it is controversial at all. The one guy who's I think is being overdrafted, and I think he's on the downswing of his career, and he's just a team cancer, is Stephon Diggs.
Fair enough.
Anybody that watched the Texans last year knows that Nico Collins is the number one receiver.
Yeah.
Michael, in a lot of these like draft rankings, they're like
Mhm.
the same, they're like 1-2.
Yeah, I don't I've seen. I think it's risky because they have 3 guys that are catching the ball out there at a high level, and I don't think 2 should be being drafted, like, back to back. Like, it's just really and it's like almost like if you're taking Diggs, it's like you're taking a gamble that, like, okay, Collins is, like, either gonna get hurt or have a really, like, disappointing year, and Stephon Diggs is gonna emerge as the favorite target, and I think that there's just an inherent risk with that.
And not, the thing with Nico Collins is he broke out last year. Big reason why just freaking better quarterback play, dude.
Exactly, yeah.
Like, and
No
here's the
more
thing though.
Davis Mills.
But here's the thing with Diggs is, and this is what happened last year when Stroud was drafted. They asked
Mhm,
Stroud which receiver that we could pick do you like the most, and he said Tank Dell.
mhm.
He still likes Tank Dell. It's not like he's going to stop throwing the ball to Tank Dell because now they have Diggs.
No, and they also, like, as much as Diggs will need to play for this reason, it's the same reason that the Texans won't feel any obligation. He has no contract. He's not making, like, any money this year significantly. They're not any sort of financial commitment, not that they'd cut him or anything, but it's not like he's the $28 million man that they need to feed the ball to feel that it's worth it. Like, he's just, he's a veteran that is a good receiver, has proven a good receiver that he needs to, you know, prove to earn a new contract after the way things ended poorly in Buffalo. So, yeah,
Yeah,
I
they're
think that's
just
fair.
yeah. The Texans are like, okay, we're serious about contending now because we have this like
Mhm.
future All Pro, perennial All Pro quarterback. We need to just get as many weapons as we can to compete with, really just compete with Kansas City and like Buffalo and
Yeah, you gotta
the
compete with the
Dolphins, right? So
Baltimore.
like Diggs is known for making a lot of clutch catches in games. Most famously, the Minneapolis Miracle, right?
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't translate to fantasy. Like he could make some really clutch catches in games. They might be the only catches he has in the game.
I mean, listen, Diggs was a top fantasy receiver when he got to Buffalo, like for sure. And that last year obviously had the fall off towards the end of the season. Things weren't going well. But yeah, I think Diggs is a fair fade this year. My receiver that I am fading is Chris Olave. So Olave had 1,000 yards last year. Didn't know he had 1,000 yards last year. Didn't feel like he did, but the Saints like weirdly ended up with a good statistical passing offense by the end of the season. Something just beyond. But like you talked about already, Derek Carr is just not very good, and I don't think that we're going to get some sort of jump from Olave that's warranted where he's being drafted. Olave's getting drafted in like the second and third rounds of these fantasy drafts, and I just don't see him as a guy that, if you're getting drafted in the second or third round, you need like close to 1,200 yards and close to double digit touchdowns. And with Kamara being, I think, probably going to be the guy that maybe gets the most catches this year in the entire Saints offense, and Derek Carr's inability to like consistently push the ball down the field, I don't think Olave is like poised for some sort of extra leap breakout this year. I think that
Well,
he's
can
just
I
kind of
also
doomed.
may I add on to your
Yeah,
point?
please.
So when uh, JJ McCarthy, your boy,
Yeah.
got the meniscus surgery, one rumor that was floated out was the Saints called the Vikings and asked them, "What would you trade us for Derek Carr?" Derek Carr's still a Saint, so I imagine those talks didn't exactly go very far. But
Yeah.
they really like Spencer Rattler, what he's shown in camp. It's not
I
a
mean,
good
that's
sign for a receiver if they're not confident in the guy that's going to have to get him the ball.
hmm
Like this, I don't think this isn't like see, this is my take is with the Saints on offense. This isn't like a Viking situation where Kevin O'Connell is a good scheme guy and like Jay Jetta is going to still put up monster numbers,
hmm
despite whoever throws him the ball, right?
hmm
Because he is just better than Chris Olave. Or Darnold is at least semi capable of throwing the ball downfield. He's just not good.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I don't know, dude. Like that's a really good fade because I talked to a guy, he traded in his dynasty league Michael Pittman for Chris Olave for some reason. And it was like,
Yeah.
I don't
I believe in Pittman more for sure. Yeah.
tight end.
Go ahead.
Tight end that I really like. So this guy is going really late. Like he's going like the 10th round. And I
hmm
think you can get both of these guys in like depending on this how you it snakes. Maybe like maybe both within kind of like the same if you just want to have two tight ends, which I think you should have two tight ends, in my opinion, because
It
it's such a
depends. Yeah.
volatile
Yeah.
position.
hmm
David Njoku.
That you like.
I really like David Njoku because
Okay.
I'll tell you why. When you look at this Browns offense, Njoku really took off near the end of the year when like Amari Cooper was like dinged up
hmm
and they needed like a threat when Joe Flacco was just saying F it. I'm just gonna
hmm
sling it downfield.
Yeah.
David Njoku like really I think really stepped up. And even though the creep is now back at quarterback, they don't have Nick Chubb to just heavily lean on. They're going to have to throw the ball.
hmm
And even though they acquired Jerry Jeudy, who's a fraud, like he just sucks, you know.
hmm
And Amari Cooper, they just don't want to pay, and they try trading him to the Niners to get Brandon Ayuk. So that kind of tells you what they think of Amari Cooper, right?
Right.
Njoku's the guy they're the one they're invested in. They gave him a new contract. They're paying him
Yeah.
a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like for the 10th round, dude, that's really good value.
Yeah, I think it's fair, although I do have another opposite take of it. But for the
No,
tight
no.
end,
So what's your opposite take?
well, it'll it's actually my tight end I don't like. So I
Really?
guess we'll get yeah. The tight end I like is Isaiah Likely. I think that he kind of like when Mark Andrews got hurt, I thought he filled in very nicely, and then Mark Andrews got back, and I still think Likely was kind of the more favored tight end. Granted, maybe it's because he wasn't fully healthy, but I still believe that, Isaiah Likely was kind of the more favored target, and especially if Mark Andrews is gonna be banged up entering the season because of this car crash and whatever. I think that there's more value in drafting Isaiah Likely in the later rounds than where Mark Andrews is getting drafted. I think we could truly see like a passing of the reins where Likely they're running a lot of 12 personnel because they do run the ball a ton and they are one of the most run favored teams in the league, Baltimore that is. That just two tight end packages to be able to creatively throw out of it. If teams are still going to favor to cover Andrews and put their better guy on Andrews, that'll give likely more favorable matchups. I'm a fan, and I like the upside that he brings as a guy that I think could end up taking the majority of the targets out of the um, tight end position. So yeah, okay. And then your
So
dislike.
so tight end that I dislike. I think this is controversial. I think where he's being picked, and what we both talked about numerous times about this team, Travis Kelsey.
Mm,
So Travis Kelsey, when he was healthy last year, had the most points per game at the tight end position.
hmm.
The problem is he was never healthy last year. And
Yeah.
it's looking more and more that this might be his last year.
Final season, yeah.
This might be his final season. And the Kansas City Chiefs are good enough all around where they can literally sit Kelsey for like 6 games and they'll still win 13 games and then go in the playoff. Like the objective for them is we need Travis Kelsey healthy for the playoffs. Like that
Hmm.
is the objective, which tells me they aren't going to throw the ball a ton to him, and they've already sort of tipped their hand because they went out in the offseason, spent a first round pick on a wide receiver in Xavier Worthy.
Hmm.
They signed Hollywood Brown, and they still have like Mecole Hardman.
Hmm.
And there's also another former Chief floating around who just was released, who they may bring back in Juju Smith-Schuster. Like they're and they've also been trying to feature Noah Gray more because that's the heir apparent to Travis Kelsey. Like if you're gonna go in the second round and just be like, I'm gonna pick Travis Kelsey because like he's still a big fixture in the Chiefs offense, and whatever. Like
Yeah, I don't think he's worthy of the top draft pick that he even like, he was still first round picks last year. And I don't know if it's worth taking him in the second round when he's a guy that could just mostly be relied upon in like big situations like late in games, third downs, where it's just like he's the reliable option down the stretch as opposed to the volume option that he used to be. Because the volume just last year was down stupendously. And because when he got the preferred targets, when he was the high targeted guy that day, he was still producing. It's just the targets and general attention went down. Like you said, you want to keep him healthier and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, I think for where he's getting drafted, I think it's worth it. And I tip my hand with David Njoku as the guy I dislike. The reason I dislike him is kind of for what you said that he really took off when Joe Flacco was the quarterback, and he became Joe Flacco's favorite, um, favorite favorite receiver, favorite target. And I think that, when he was playing with Deshaun Watson, he was barely getting any targets. He was one of the least targeted tight ends in the league, and Watson was just not giving him the love. And granted, their passing offense was kind of poor as a whole. So not that to say, oh, Joe Flacco's a better quarterback than Deshaun Watson, but Joe Flacco was more decisive, better timing, all that sort of stuff, showing off the big arm. And Njoku was the
Well,
big
this is kind of one of my
beneficiary.
one of my takes entering this year is I think if the creep just sucks again, they have Jameis Winston, who's like a more talented version of Joe Flacco. Eff it, I'm slinging the ball.
I just don't think they're gonna ever bench Watson. I think contractually, you gave him all that guaranteed money. I don't think you gave him all that guaranteed money to ride the bench. I don't think the team is good enough to be like, "Oh, man, we're playing Watson over Jameis Winston. We're really killing our Super Bowl chances here." It's not like you have some backup that is young or better in terms of just pure, football sense or whatever. It's just like I don't think the Browns team is good enough and the backup is good enough to justify sitting him for the contract. Now, and I'm not a proponent of oh, you play the guy because he makes the money, but when you're an organization that mortgaged as much as they mortgaged for a guy with the nastiest record as a quarterback in the league, gave him an unprecedented contract, fully guaranteed 200 something million, 255 million, whatever it is, to then be benched halfway through the year for Jameis Winston, I just
Jameis
don't
Winston
see that
apparently
happening.
has been having an awful training camp.
Yeah, he's been a great teammate, bad player is what it looks like. So, yeah, I just if Watson, unless like you said, and I think there is things going for Njoku, like you said, he's coming off a really strong end of the season. I think it's something worth for the Browns to be like, okay, maybe we need to make him more of a focal point in the offense because things were going well when Flacco was feeding him the ball. I absolutely think that's
So their
true, and the big
new play
contract.
caller, so their new play caller is Ken Dorsey.
Yeah.
Is Ken Dorsey. Um, Ken Dorsey. I mean, Ken Dorsey is always trying to feature tight ends like Dawson
Mhm.
Knox, and then then the Bills drafted Dalton Kincaid, and they featured him as well.
Mhm.
I don't know, we'll see. I mean, there's other guys too that we like, and think we'll talk about it more as the season progresses. Maybe we do the picks. Like, bro, we're doing the picks in less than 3 weeks,
I know, it's something.
right?
Certainly something.
So we talked a lot of fantasy football. I thought it was a pretty productive conversation.
Yeah, I agree.
We're going to talk about a little bit of the Eagles, and then we'll close the show with the Phillies because that's the most important thing right now. So
Mhm.
Eagles preseason game, New England Patriots. We'll just go real quick with just some quick hitters. Guys that stood out to me. Number one guy that stood out to me was Keely Ringo.
Mm. Mhm.
Granted, he's projected to possibly start, and the Patriots blow,
Right.
but he just looked like the most talented guy on the field when both teams were on the field by
Yeah.
far.
Yeah.
He stood out the most.
Yeah.
And to what you brought up about with Jalen Mills being released earlier this week about maybe the Eagles bringing him back, I just don't see the room for him on the roster.
No,
That's
probably not. He'll probably get snatched up, but, if whatever. But, yeah, I think Keely Ringo looked really good. Um, I'm a fan of Ringo. I'm excited. I hope that, he plays well. Quinyon Mitchell looked good again. You know, just from what I've just in practice and what you hear, I guess, even absent of a game, but he I like the secondary, I just kinda do. And then, like, what stood out again is just Nolan Smith playing deep into a preseason game again, and I just worry. I genuinely just
Well, I
worry.
think what you should worry is that Jalix Hunt, this third round pick from like um
Wherever, yeah.
nowhere like I where did
I forget where Alex Hunt
sorry,
went to
keep
school.
talking, Michael. I'm gonna look up
Um,
Jalix Hunt where he went to college.
yeah, so I mean, when Nolan Smith's playing late into preseason games, a guy that's supposed to be relied upon as a starter, it doesn't move me a ton. Like I don't get super excited. Like he gets the sack where the running back basically chipped him so hard that he actually chipped him off of the offensive tackle that had him engaged,
Went
and
to
he kind of
Houston Christian.
yeah. So the sack that Smith got, he came screaming off the edge, picked up by the tackle. Running back came and drilled him so hard that the tackle, like, disengaged, and he was able to go get the sack. And I think I need to just see a little bit more. I guess, the best thing we'll see is that, once the regular season comes around, how does he look? But I don't know. I just don't get super encouraged when I have guys that are supposed to be key contributors playing in late in the preseason games, like late in games. So we'll see. But I thought Nakobe Dean actually looked better, which was encouraging. And people are thinking, oh, he might get the starting job. I've seen Trotter look good. It's just a matter on if someone like Nakobe Dean, like, can he even make it to October? Like, if he's going to be the starting linebacker for this team, will we be seeing him after the first month? Because is he going to be able to stay healthy? And I just don't know.
Well, when Fangio has a history of rotating linebackers
Mhm.
in and out, trying to get to create the best matchups.
Mhm. Yeah, and
Right.
I don't think anyone is good enough necessarily to be just, "All right, they're left out there for the majority of the game." I think you're just gonna have to rotate the interior linebackers for the most part. I don't know who's gonna wear the green dot, if it's gonna be just like Blankenship, who's gonna be out there every play, or if it's gonna be a linebacker, because if it's a linebacker, I don't feel great about it because I don't think
It
a lot
might
of
be like
linebackers work.
it could be like a Darius Slay or someone with the most
I think
experience.
I think I think it might be, like, more I feel like it's gonna be a safety, like, I think it's gonna be Blankenship, but I think the best method the Eagles can proceed with their linebackers is, like, play the ones who suck the most the least, but you're not, like, strict with the guys that are playing well, because I think the best guys, truly, are probably the most injury prone. So I think you've gotta really be careful about keeping them healthy.
Yeah, I would say other standouts for me. I mean, Will Shipley, I thought looked really good, especially on that one screen pass. I think it's pretty much set now that their top three running backs are Saquon, Kenny
Mhm.
Gainwell, and Will Shipley. Is Will Shipley going to get used a lot? No, but you know, I feel like this is like every year. We're like, okay, Kenny Gainwell. They really like Kenny Gainwell. He goes into the game and he just don't really see. He doesn't give you that like third down running back like juice
Mhm.
that we're accustomed to seeing with like like what Brian Westbrook would give you, LaShawn McCoy, Darren Sproles, right? We don't
Like,
really,
it's
you don't
both
get that.
those yeah, both those guys, I think Shipley and Gainwell, I think they're both guys that are, like, they're gonna get what's in front of them, and that's pretty much it. I don't think that either guy is gonna be some big play threat, some home run hitter,
But I think
but I
what
think they can hit some
Shipley,
singles,
so from what I saw in the preseason was that Shipley has done a decent job blocking.
which that'll
And
always play up. Difference is they do have like, Barkley's just gonna be on the field, like, all the time.
yeah, but I also think too, like, they kind of, I think Ross Tucker alluded to it too, like, because of Saquon's like injury history, like,
they're still going to rotate. Like they're not going to.
He's gonna get rotated. Like he's gonna be in on obviously all the key downs. Like he's not gonna.
Exactly, and that's the big difference. Because in years like last year, for example, when you have fans crying that DeAndre Swift isn't on the field in the second half, and like they're down and they're throwing all the time, and where's Swift? It's because Swift was like he's a terrible blocker, and like if you're throwing, they're gonna rather have Gainwell out there if Gainwell's gonna do a better job of blocking, even though Gainwell wasn't a great blocker last year either. But you know, when the Eagles are down and they need to throw, like Barkley's going to be on the field because I do think he's like a good enough blocker, but it's also you're going to be getting the ball in his hands to make plays, like whether that be out of the backfield, whether that be lined up in the slot. But it'll be interesting to see when Barkley's off the field if you just see more Shipley than Gainwell because Shipley is the better blocker. It's like, okay, we're going to have a little drive here that we're going to throw it a lot and maybe not necessarily to the running back. And you see majority Will Shipley snap count because he's blocking better, that sort of thing. And I do think Shipley's a better receiver. But I think they're guys that Hole will be there. They'll weasel their way. They'll fall forward, get their head down, pick up 7 yards if 7 yards is given to them, but neither guy's going to break and turn a 6-yard gain into a 28-yard gain or anything like that. They're going to get what's in front of them. And I don't need more from my backup running backs, especially now that you do have some established back in Barkley.
Yeah. Guys that I didn't like, the backup tackles did not do a good job.
Yeah, they're never very inspiring, I have to say. They haven't been inspiring
Kennard
in a
and
while.
Johnson played well the first week, and I think they agreed. I think both teams may have agreed before the game, hey, let's run more blitzes because we want to test our backups to see how they handle blitzes. Because you don't really blitz in training camp,
Yeah, yeah.
And Kennard and Johnson did. I'm going to talk about this other guy that was also part of the problem, but they just did not look. They did not do a good job.
Yeah,
no, I
don't. When the tackles go down, it's really kind of DEFCON 5, and it's been that way since the Super Bowl. Like they haven't been able to withstand a tackle injury since they won the Super Bowl. And it's just kind of the fact of it. And listen, it's hard. It's hard to find backup tackles that are capable. And you Big V Vitae got paid off of being a backup tackle, winning a Super Bowl with the Eagles. So I just don't think if you're finding a guy that's going to be a good enough, comfortable enough backup for your tackles, he's going to get paid as soon as he's available. So it's hard to keep refinding guys that can, be backups that are not just like revolving doors.
Yeah, but I remember even before the season began, there was talks the Eagles were going to spend a first-round pick on a tackle.
Which that would be like the, heir to Lane Johnson, assuming he retires pretty soon.
And Tyler Steen can't stay healthy, and
seems like he wasn't going to win the starting guard job anyways.
With Mekhi
Becton wasn't even dressed.
Yeah, I saw a Jets fan tweet. They're like, I'm probably going to lose my mind if like Bryce Huff gets more sacks than Reddick as a Jet,
and Mekhi
Becton turns into a viable NFL starter.
Yeah, which feels like that's the what it's going to be.
And the other guy I didn't like was I know you hate this guy. That would be the former Steeler quarterback Kenny Pickett.
Yeah, I mean, has
some of those sacks, he just held on to the ball too long.
Has he been worse than Mariota? I don't know. It's been pretty neck and neck. Maybe
he's been slightly better than Mariota. Mariota might have been the worst preseason quarterback I've seen the Eagles in backup. I've seen invested in.
Chase Daniel.
For sure. Oh, Chase Daniel. That's a good point. Chase Daniel.
He got $7 million a year. Chase Daniel was awful. But regardless, yeah, the fact that we're having conversations just shows how bad Kenny Pickett has been. Crazy to think that a team once upon a time spent a first round pick on this guy. Um, Different than Mariota. Not to totally disrespect Mariota, because once upon a time, Marcus Mariota was a good quarterback in this league. Won a playoff game. Capable sort of performances out there consistently those first few years in the league. Kenny Pickett, he's just awful, man. He's not good. Um, Granted, I do think that if he were required to play a game because Jalen Hurts was a little banged up, I think that Kellen Moore would really be in his bag with running plays, and quick hitting passes that don't require much of anything other than just getting the ball out of your hands to the open man. I think he would get very creative with route running and, you know, make it as little of a job on Kenny Pickett to make serious throws as possible if you ever had to play in the regular season. And that's all you're doing here. Like, that's all you're worried about with the backup quarterback. It's not every day you're going to find a backup quarterback that you can believe in to go win a Super Bowl. I mean, listen, Nick Foles was the biggest. Obviously, it's happened probably like two other times in NFL history, but he him going on the Super Bowl heater, mostly the NFC Championship game and the Super Bowl, like that was the most, you know, unbelievable fairy tale type nonsense I've ever seen. Like, there's just I think as Eagle fans, I think that we've been poisoned by that almost, that there's a large faction of fans that just like it's like I need my backup quarterback to be able to do a little bit of what Nick Foles did the year we won the Super Bowl. And I just think that's very, very unrealistic. I think that sort of boom or bust potential comes with guys like Jameis Winston, Gardner Minshew, like Minshew being like probably the main one, which we had as a backup, and then he went and got paid, to be backup elsewhere. Gardner Minshew just got paid like $13 million. Like, you're not paying a guy of his caliber that sort of money to
Well, I think
not
here's the
play.
thing, though, Michael. Too, that's a good point. Like, we
All
want
those quarterbacks that are backups that are capable of that sort of thing, they end up going to teams that are in need of a quarterback, have a young quarterback that is not sure what we're gonna get, and they're paid to be like this semi-starter that if the young kid outperforms, you don't feel bad about not playing because they're not making that much money, but you're definitely paying them more than what good teams would pay to make them their backup as a premium.
Yeah, so my take, so this kind of leads into a guy that I thought looked good, seemingly has outperformed Pickett in camp
Mhm.
and looked really good in this preseason game despite being with the third stringers, and he looked good last year too. It's Tanner McKee.
Yeah, I mean, Tanner McKee has absolutely looked good, as an option for the Eagles, for sure.
And I think the reason why, like, Jesus, dude. Here's a headline from NBC. Here's a bleeding. This is from NBC Sports Philadelphia. Rube's observations. Ruben Frank, the guy, your boy Ruben Frank.
Yeah,
Tanner
God.
McKee shows Kenny Pickett how it's done. Yikes!
Yeah, I mean, that's not a good look for sure, but,
But like, here's the
he
thing with Tanner
he
McKee:
he
six
just
foot
looks
six,
better.
231 pounds. He just looks like a pro quarterback.
He's a big guy, like, he's a bigger guy than Pickett, and he looks like he just has more arm talent than Pickett at this
Yeah,
point.
like you look at like Jalen Hurts, and then you look at like Kenny Pickett, who are both like
Smaller
shorter
dudes.
shorter quarterbacks. They're not the tallest quarterbacks. Jalen Hurts just looks like a pro quarterback, right?
I mean, Kenny Pickett's the small like, Kenny Pickett we've been talking about this for how long now, that Kenny Pickett's hopes and dreams were to be as good as Alex Smith was. And, like, Alex Smith was a good quarterback for multiple teams. But that was, like, the ceiling of what he could reach, and he hasn't really come close to it. But based on Alex Smith's size and ability, he was able to put together a pretty nice career as an accurate quarterback that ran well, not the strongest of arms, all that sort of stuff. And I just don't think that Pickett has like any of the qualities to the standard that Alex Smith kind of set. And that's why he's a backup now. Listen, if Kenny Pickett was relied upon to go win a Super Bowl and go, if he was relied upon to go play like more than 3 games, I'm not feeling pretty good about it. But at the same time, if Jalen Hurts is hurt for more than 3 games, I don't really feel good about the season kind of as a whole. So, if my starter is going to get hurt for an extended period of time, there's a very short list of backup quarterbacks that I would feel comfortable with. Tanner McKee isn't on that list either, to be fair. But I
No,
guess
but Michael, I think the thing is, you just mentioned these like veteran guys, like, dude, if like Tanner McKee is like
he
Jake
can be a
Browning,
good career backup.
if
Yeah.
Tanner McKee was like Jake Browning was for the Bengals last year, like the Eagles can win games with that.
Yeah. You can win games, I think, with Tanner McKee. Here's the thing, again, like same thing with Pickett, that if Hurts gets injured, Kellen Moore is going to really have to cook and make the quarterback's job as easy as possible. If it's Kenny Pickett versus if it's Tanner McKee, I think the only difference really is you can probably get away with pushing the ball downfield a little bit more with Tanner McKee as the quarterback. So if that's
Yeah,
all it takes, then I think it's
because if
worth
like
it.
Kellen Moore is just scheming Devontae Smith like wide open, all you have to tell Tanner McKee is like, look for Devontae, he's going to be wide open. It's like, oh,
Yeah.
okay,
Yeah, it's like if
oh,
if
okay.
you can if you can draw up guys get open down the field, dig routes or whatever, and McKee's stepping into it and slinging the ball, it's just yeah, I think there's a higher
Like I
ceiling
remember
with
last
Tanner
year, like
McKee.
Jake Browning, it was like it's like, dude, we're gonna run a screen. Jamar's gonna be like, all he needs to do is just snap the ball, throw it as
Get it
hard
in
as
his
he can
hands.
to
Yeah,
Jamar, and he's gonna make a play. It's
yeah.
like stuff like that.
Chase Brown, like it just everything. When Jake Browning took over, it was just, you know, make the job easy and make the right plays. And yeah, I don't know. I'm not pleased with Kenny Pickett. I don't think they're gonna like the only way they're getting rid of him is if they're trading him to like the Vikings or something, and you're getting back what you gave up to get him. I don't think the Eagles will cut him, given that they're
No,
trading.
no, no. They're gonna hold on to him, and then.
Exactly.
But yeah, all right, man. We talked. This is the longest we talked football in a very long time.
Hmm.
So let's wrap up with the Phils. So, all right, I'm just gonna come out and say it, bro. I think Kyle Schwarber may have saved the season the other night.
Yeah, I mean Kyle Schwarber has had his best year as a Philly for sure. One of the better years of his career. OPS in like the mid to upper 800s. Hitting, walking, obviously, hitting home runs. The grand slam was needed. I was texting with Nick, and it was actually before the game they lost to Miami, before the Taiwan start. And I was like, Taiwan's going to give us like 3 earned through 4, and the offense and bullpen are just going to have to do a job. And it's exactly what he gave you, except the other two things didn't really happen. They lost. What Nick said, the whole point is that Nick was like, I kind of need he was almost right on the money just a day early. He was like, I need a game where the offense needs to like save the day. And I think that will get them sort of their swagger back and get their confidence back going. And he thought it was going to happen the Taiwan day. He's like, I think Taiwan's going to get bombed and the offense is just going to need to score a bunch of runs and they're going to win the game like 8-6 or something like that. And obviously, we watched what the awful debacle that Tuesday's Marlins game was, and it was terrible. But fast forward the next day, and it's exactly what Nick said he wanted to happen is what happened. Tyler Phillips got smacked around, had a bad start, and the offense was needed, and it came through with the Kyle Schwarber grand slam to put the Phillies on top 6-5, and they end up winning the game. Um, And, it was exactly what he had said, but just a day early, where the offense needed to be the reason they won because the starter had a bad outing, and it kinda got their confidence going. They had the team meeting before that game, and you saw everyone felt almost relieved when that ball left, and then they followed it up the next 2 days, really, but especially the next day against the Nationals, where everybody in the starting lineup got a hit. Weston Wilson hit for the cycle. They were base running aggressively and well. Bryce was taking extra bases. He was, playing harder. It just the veterans who have looked like they were almost disinterested and playing in almost a lazy manner. Bryce Harper, Trey Turner, and JT Realmuto being the biggest culprits of that. They all looked a lot more engaged in the big offensive day against the Nationals. And again, Turner didn't even play, but or sorry, he did play, but he didn't play in the Marlins game. But with the big Nationals, when he looked better, taking extra bases, running well, Harper was taking extra bases. JT yesterday had 2 perfect throws, which he hadn't had good throws in a long, long time. His defense really was lacking for some time, which I thought a lot of it looked lazy to me, but he looked a lot more engaged defensively the last few days. So it's encouraging to see the veterans finally being the leaders that they're supposed to be and acting that way and kind of helping them push out of their rut and out of what awful slump they were in. And, after 2 nice wins with the offense, to be able to follow it up and just get the walk-off win yesterday where the offense mostly disappointed, um, it was nice because it just the way they're winning, the way things are going, it looks a lot more like they did the first few months of the season where they're finding ways to win, different guys are coming through, they're winning in different ways, and that's sort of the makeup of what you need to have to win playoff baseball games, and I'm very, very encouraged with what I've seen the last few days. I'm not here to say, "Oh, the parade's back on," or whatever, but Nola had a very good start yesterday. Wheeler had a very good start again. Um, I'm pretty much encouraged with all the bats that were struggling at this point. Real Muto's hit the ball a lot harder recently. Marsh has hit the ball harder a lot more recently. Rojas, since coming off the IL, has been wonderful. Stott's hitting the ball on the ground a little bit more, which is nice. And obviously Turner seemingly broke out of his slump. And to even double down, the bullpen, since their little mishaps, they've all seemingly settled down. I'm okay that Carlos Estevez is having his issues in August and they're winning the games anyways. I do think that he'll be fine once playoff time rolls around. But Alvarado's looked better, Strom's looked better, Hoffman's looked back. Everything everything that I've needed to have seen in the last week, last few days, I've been seeing. And the next 2 things on the list are a bounce back start from Christopher Sanchez today, and then whenever Ranger makes his next start, which is seemingly going to be Tuesday, that he looks like back to what he, was early in the season before having to get this
The
little
Ranger
rest.
is going to make one more start, and that start is going to deter in the minors. It's going to determine if he's going to be brought back up or if he has any more back soreness or any issues. Because in
Or
a
just
bullpen session,
yeah.
he looked really good. They said like no issues,
Hmm.
precision. His pitching was on point. His fastball was hitting the low 90s, right around where he throws. But he was
Hmm.
pinpoint with all of his off speed pitches. If he looks good, he's going to get called back up next week. Here's the thing, though, with today's game at 6. Christopher Sanchez needs a bounce back. He's just
For
been
sure.
roughed up the last couple of times he's gone out, right?
He looks
Sunday,
tired.
on Sunday, the Nationals are going to have their best pitcher, Jake Irvin, pitch versus Taiwan. Now,
Hmm.
Taiwan, does Taiwan catch more crap than he should? Like,
Like, yeah.
yeah. Does that mean every time he pitches, we're just like he's like the Make a Wish kid, where we're just like, oh, it's okay, he gave up 4 runs because or
The
whatever. Like, no,
expectations for him are so low. No, he doesn't get treated like a Make-A-Wish kid. But I think it's the expectations for him are pretty low where I just need him to I kinda just need him to eat innings. Like, if you're gonna battle through 5, 6 innings and you're gonna give up, like, 4 or less runs, that's fine. Every 5th day, I, like, desperately need the offense to have a good day. I can't be too mad at it. He's your 5th starter. Not many 5th starters are good. So
Yeah, and I also think too, it's like the Phillies just dominate the Nationals. Like you just
mhm.
kind of get worried that there's going to come a point where it's like it has to go the other way at least a little bit.
Listen, when you were entering this 6-game stretch against the Marlins and Nationals here, I was like, "I really need 5 and 1," and you lost the first one to the Marlins, so you set yourself up. If you go 4 and 2, but you win today and you lose tomorrow on, like, some just a tough loss that offense, Taiwan gets blown up, the offense plays well, but it's not enough. Like, am I gonna kill 'em? Like, no, because of how good the good has looked. It's not like they're winning in bad ways. But if they're gonna go 4 and 2, I need a big road stand series this week with the Braves. So, I you
Yeah,
know
so like here's the thing that kind of frustrates me with the offense because we mentioned the offense. Um the one guy dude right now and he's like literally making it like an argument where you're just like give Juan Soto over $500 million right
Mhm.
now is Brandon Marsh. In like over 300 plate appearances, he's struck out over 100 times.
Yeah, Marsh has had absolutely a down season offensively. He
And
looks to be getting out of it. Um, you know, obviously the big pinch hit double. Well, it would have been a single, but double. The ball was smoked off the wall. He hit the ball hard 3 times against, the Marlins the other day in their win. It's looked better, but for sure it's been very, very frustrating offensively at this point,
you really don't want like depending on how bad this Hayes injury is. Like
which I don't think is that bad.
I don't think it's that bad either. It's like they flirted with the idea of Weston Wilson being a pinch hitter slash like utility player because he plays left field, right field, third base, first base,
Second base.
second base. They flirted with this idea, and it's like, dude, like Weston Wilson needs to save the season. Like,
Well, I think that, what they're gonna do when Hayes gets back, I'm thinking they'll send Cal Stevenson back down. I don't
yeah,
think they're gonna send Weston Wilson back down, but once the play like, Rojas, since getting back from AAA, since getting back from his demotion, has been a very, very good player. He struck out a lot less, he's putting together a lot better at bats, he's getting more hits. It's just he's offensively has been a very just good at bat kind of every single time, and that's all you really are asking for him with the defense that you get from him. So I think if he's gonna become and play good enough offensively to be an everyday player once the playoffs roll around, you're looking at, I think, what's gonna be probably a pretty strict platoon between Austin Hayes and Brandon Marsh in left field, and I think that that was, like, the original plan when the trade was made was that he'd play every day because Rojas was hitting so poorly. But if Rojas is gonna step up and kinda just be a solid hitter out there, I think that coming back from injury as well, I think it's not a bad idea to platoon those 2 guys and be good about it. Like, Rob Thompson yesterday made 2 uh, substitutions with the lineup, which I thought was good because I don't think he's usually aggressive enough in that regard during the game with pinch hitting and whatnot. Made the substitution with Brandon Marsh for him to get the big hit, and then made the substitution on Rojas with Cal Stevenson, knowing you were going to bunt with him because Stevenson is the better bunter. Bunt was made, ninth inning, Nationals defensive lapse, and they eventually walked it off. I think if once the playoffs roll around, if you're gonna run a platoon with Hayes and Marsh, I think you should be pretty strict about it. Righty starter on the mound, you're starting Marsh. they bring in a lefty in the 7th inning, I think you put Hayes in there for that at bat. I don't think it's too small of a moment if the game is close to get a hitter up there that you think is going to give you a better battle than what Marsh is. And I think vice versa, lefty starter, you start Hayes, they bring in a righty reliever. I think you make the move and put Marsh in there.
Well, yeah, I agree. I think with Rojas though too, like the month of August, like when was he demoted?
Johan Rojas was demoted.
June 7th. He was in June.
It was in June, but it was for some time. Like, it was in June, and then injuries came, and he came back up, and he
He
played.
struggled. He still struggled in July, but in August,
He struggled in July, then the trade deadline came, and he just was not playing. Like, played against Seattle, and then didn't play for 5 days, and then had a good game against the Dodgers and a win, and then he's kind of that also coincided around the time when Hayes got hurt, and then he's been playing every day, and in playing every day, he's been a much better player.
yeah. I mean, I think like that's the big thing is that the guy that's going to bat ninth in the Phillies lineup because the Phillies have a unique situation with the Kyle Schwarber batting leadoff. Your number 9 guy has to find ways to get on base.
Yeah, it's your number 9 guy, and, like, this before the grand slam, there were 2 outs, like, Rojas worked a walk, like or got an infield single, and it's just there are times where you're just gonna need him to turn the lineup over in a big spot, whether it's like, "Oh, there's 1 out and runners on," like, it'd be so much better if you got on base instead of you can't roll into a double play, or if there's 2 outs and runners on and the 9 hitters up Rojas, you gotta give me a good battle and a good fight and do everything you can be to be damned to get Schwarber to the plate in a big
Yeah,
spot.
wear out the pitcher so they go against Schwarber.
Yeah,
The pitcher loses concentration or just flat out misses and throws a beach ball to Schwarber to like smoke.
yeah,
Uh
yeah.
Pitching wise, with the bullpen, I'm not worried about the bullpen per se. I like that Alvarado's kind of bouncing back.
He looks better. He's throwing he really had to get his command back. I think his biggest problem was, um his biggest problem, was that he wasn't throwing his cutter for strikes anymore, and generally, as this year has gone on, his velocity has been lower, and I think he's gonna push it back up again in the playoffs maybe because he has shown that he can still, like, hit 100 with the sinker and 94 on the cutter, but for the most of the year, he's been throwing, like, 97, 98 on the sinker and, like, 92 on the cutter. So he hasn't been throwing his cutter for strikes, and if it is a strike, it's hung. And, when you're getting at bats against him and the book's out where he's only throwing sinker cutter, but he's not throwing that cutter for strikes, you're just sitting on the sinker. And a 98-mile-an-hour sinker, it's still good, but when that's the only pitch you're really looking for, it becomes a lot easier to hit him. Absolutely. And if you get the cutter and you're going to hit it, it's because it's hung. That is also not ideal. So he's been a little more accurate, been better command as of late, and I think, that goes hand in hand with him getting better results on the mound out there as opposed to, when he was going through his ruts. And it
Yeah,
makes
Chris.
me he's a big X factor for me with the bullpen because I believe in Hoffman, trust him with my life. Like I trust fairly well and fairly highly Matt Strom as well. I do believe that Kerkering will eventually kind of shake his way out of it too, and I think that Estevez having issues now is better than issues later. He was due for regression at some point. To have it now and not kill you is not as big of a deal. I think Alvarado's that guy that really elevates the bullpen. If he's a weapon that can be highly trusted, I think that's what makes the bullpen that much better. when you can bring him in a spot to get out of it. Just another arm, another lefty at flamethrower that can get you out of trouble so you don't have to feel like you're mortgaging your lefties and you have to be, you know, super strategic on when you use Matt Strom because you don't trust another lefty late in the game. So, yeah, he's the big reason, big X factor for me.
So unfortunately, so just because this is today, so Christopher Sanchez, since being named to the All Star game, Michael. I mean, I'm going to be just blunt. He sucked.
Yeah,
He's
he's been rough.
2-5 with a 6.63 earned run average.
Hmm.
38 innings. He's only going 4 innings now. Granted, I think he had one game where he was literally just being destroyed. That might
Yeah,
skew the ERA a little bit, but 38 innings, 53 hits, 28 earned runs, a whip of 1.66. Michael,
mhm,
if he doesn't bounce back and he's just getting smacked around the rest of the season,
mhm.
they make the playoffs. Like, you really need a 3-man rotation, right? Like,
You need 3 starters, and if you have a 4th guy that can be trusted upon, that's, like, a luxury. And it's like, you look at the Philly starters, the last 2 years, they've had 2 guys that they've trusted to go deep in games with Nola and Wheeler, and then they've had a 3rd guy, which has been Ranger both times, that they trusted to get through, like, the order once or twice, which nets you about 4, max, like, 5 innings. I think that, if Ranger comes back, looks good, feels healthy, that'll be a 3rd guy that you can trust to go deep into a game, and then Sanchez becomes that shorter, "Oh, just get me through the l order once and or get me, you know, pitch me till you get to the 3 hitter the 2nd time." So it's like, I need 11 outs out of you, and however long that takes, you might get 11 outs through 3 and 2/3. You might, whatever. Just get me 11 outs as clean as you can get me it, and we'll go from there. And I think Sanchez, if he bounces back the rest of the year, doesn't feel fatigued, can be trusted to go maybe a little bit further than it, which would be a luxury. But point being is you need definitely 3 starters for the playoffs.
agreed. I also think, too, that the. Is he just running out of gas? Like,
Yeah, I think that him and Ranger are both tired. Like, they're both guys that
dude, like, I'm not to sound like your dad, but, like, come on. Like,
I get it, but it's when they're guys that have never thrown that many innings, like, in their life at that point in the season, I think it's just normal that they get dead armed at a certain point, and I think that's just something that they were dealing with, and it's why I think Ranger went on the IL. Like, Ranger Suarez never was here, like, early on in the season on time. Like, whether it was visa issues, whether it was an injury in the spring, slow ramp up, whatever, Ranger was, like, almost never ready for opening day and always was starting up in, like, May, and things were fine, and he was good, everything a happy day. He was here, he was on time, there was no issues, and he was great out the gate and was on pace to throw what, 200 innings? Ranger Suarez in his professional career had never thrown more than um, in his professional career had never thrown more than 155 innings, which including the playoffs is about like 170 innings. Was 2022. That was the most he'd ever thrown. He was on pace to hit 200 innings in the regular season. He was going to blow past that number just in the regular season. I mean, I don't know. Like, I don't think it's irrational, you know, for him to be exhausted at some point. And he's at 119 innings now. He's had a pretty long break at this point. And it seems like he might be given another week, and that'll get you to the end, towards the end of August, where he'll only throw a few more starts and be ready for the playoffs. So, yeah, I think they needed to strategically manage it, and I think their way to do it with Ranger was to give him an IL stint for a little bit of time. So, I think it was smart on their end.
Agreed. But yeah, anyway, that's our show for today. Thank you everybody for tuning in. I think it stopped raining, so if you want to go outside and
Hurry up.
hurry up, it's gonna rain. Probably gonna rain again. Anyway,
Yeah.
thank you for tuning in. We really appreciate all your support. Take care.
See you next week.
See you next week.